Okay, so this was not planned that I would say this, but then when I was listening to introductions, I realized something. The reason that I'm talking about the relationship between curiosity and interest today is because I was invited to give a keynote talk a couple of years ago, actually also in the United States, and I was talking about the neuroscientific investigations of the reward processes. And at the end of the talk, I mentioned that I'm also involved in distinguishing between curiosity and interest, and this is another part of my work. And when the question-answer period came, there were about 100 people in the audience. There was not a single question about the reward processes, and everybody wanted to know about the relationship between curiosity and interest. So I figured that maybe this audience is not that different, and we would be more interested in that and motivated to listen to me. And I was mentioning to Chris and Mark the other day that probably some of you remember from early years the book Citadel by Cronin, who was in this book describing the life of a Scottish doctor who was in a Welsh mining town and eventually moved up to London and had a very successful career there, including teaching medical students. And I never forget that in this book, there is a paragraph that basically tells what university teachers should do if they lose interest in the speaker. And I was telling Chris and Mark that unfortunately, I have to make sure that I do my own work because I can't use the suggestion that they made because it would be inappropriate for this speech. The suggestion was that when you see people's eyes closing and their attention being lost, you start talking about sex. So that is not very effective. So I will do my best to keep you awake, and I will talk until you get bored, and then you can have questions, and I'll try to do my best to answer. Before I start talking, I would like to thank Charlotte, very Charlotte, who initiated all this, and Jeannie, who made it happen, Chris Alvarez, who helped, and Mark, who is the IT advisor, a role that I usually designate to my grandson Jack, who is now in the Bahamas. So thank you so much. I have taken out most of the scholarly citations of what I'm going to talk about today because I thought that that's kind of boring. But if any one of you end up with an actually emerging individual interest in what I'm talking about, then I would be very happy to give you some of the papers, books, and references so that you could get more information about that. Okay, so this is, there is an exception about citations. I have met Anne Renninger, who is one of the senior professors at Swarthmore College outside of Philadelphia, about 30 years ago. And Anne and I have collaborated for 30 years. We published papers, we did research, we published books, edited books, and nothing that I say here today has no relevance to her. So when I say we, it's usually Anne and I, or I and Anne, and a few of the citations I left there. So the title of this talk really is Einstein's error. And as you can see, being a motivational psychologist, I try to start with something that will catch your attention, like why would Einstein be wrong about anything? When I mentioned this to Chris Alvarez, he looked at me, what is wrong with the statement that he made? Well, it is because Chris, just like Einstein, didn't recognize that there is a big difference between curiosity and interest. And that he was not only curious, he was very interested. Interested means that he had a great deal of knowledge that developed along his engagements and had value, which is also a type of interest. And these two factors contribute to his incredible achievements in life. So I'm not talking about relativity, that's all I'm going to say about it. I also want to mention to you that if you want to read the PowerPoints, you can, but you don't have to, because I will, whatever is important there, I will talk about it. So you can just close your eyes if you want, but not too much, just a little bit, and just listen. Okay, so this is quickly the agenda. I'm going to talk about curiosity, interest, and their distinctions. And I'm going to tell you a few stories and personal reflections to demonstrate to you that this difference is really existing and it's very important. I will talk about the major characteristics of interest that distinguishes it from curiosity, that it develops. It's content related and it develops. And you can help your grandchildren to develop that, if you wish. I will talk about the shared characteristics and the distinguishing factors of curiosity and interest, and educational implications of this distinction. Finally, if I do have time, I will talk a little bit about the reward circuitry, neuroscientific research, and interest, but I might just quickly do this, not in detail. So, it wasn't only Einstein who did not distinguish between interest and curiosity. And the reason for that, I will come back to this point, but in the everyday language, you can say that you're curious who is going to be the next president of the United States. Or you can say that I'm interested in who is going to be the next president of the United States. So in common language, we do not distinguish between these two factors. But they are distinct. By the time you end up walking out of that door, I hope you will all be sure of that. There's nothing else. So among the psychologists and neuroscientists, there are also a lot of people who did not believe in this distinction. Either they did not acknowledge at all that interest is important, or they thought that they are synonymous terms, or they thought that it's not worth bothering. Most of us who make the distinction and insist that it's important come from educational psychology. And the reason for that is that we discovered, learned, experienced that the strategies that you use to support in the classroom to enhance curiosity is very different from what you do when you want to support interest. Interest is much wider, content related, gives opportunities for long-term engagement rather than just finding out an answer or closing a knowledge gap. We'll come back to this later. Now, my personal reflections. Andrew, my husband, and I came to North America as Hungarian refugees, very poor and very young. And I always wanted to go to university, but I couldn't because we had no money, none whatsoever. And I worked, and Andrew eventually finished his engineering. And I went back to university when I already had 2 small children, a dog, a house, a husband, and a full-time job. And this was a Renaissance education where you couldn't just pick whatever you wanted, you had to take certain subjects to get your honor. And I took Economics 100 because I had to, and I took Philosophy 100 because I wanted to. The experience of these 2 courses was totally different. I had absolutely zero interest in economics. I had huge trouble reading what I had to read. I forced myself. The effort was enormous. Every time I had to study for a test, it was the worst mark I ever had. I barely passed. After I was finished, I never picked up another book. And even in the paper, if there's too much about it, I may pass it to him, but not philosophy, I loved. Okay? So Descartes and Plato, they talked to me. I wanted to know more about it. It was not an effort for me, even if I worked all day, to sit down and study for the exam that was coming up. I spent time, I was motivated, and I enjoyed it. So I couldn't quite sort out in my mind, why is this such a different experience for me? And I figured that maybe I needed to take some psychology courses, this is a true story, to understand what is going on in my head. So this is how I actually became a psychologist. But what I would like you to understand is that there is this experience that you have when you are interested that is different. And you all experience that. That if you are interested in a book, you can hardly wait to go there and read it. You make time for yourself. You actually can persist. If there is a problem, you solve the problem so you can go back to whatever you are interested in. So, what actually is interest? A lot of people acknowledged it even in the previous century that interest is an important influence on human function. However, nobody had a theory of what actually interest is, why is it important, what is about it. And there are two famous psychologists that you might have encountered if you ever took any psychology courses. Berline was one, and Alport was another one, who in 1946 and 49 wrote about the importance, following Dewey's work, how important it would be to know more about interest. That they did. So, common sense definitions of interest are such things as action, attitude, persistence, and many other similar common sense words, but not clearly what is interest. Anne and I actually had very simply developed our definition based on a lot of work. It sounds now like I just pulled it out, but no, this is based on about 15 years of work. For us, interest is a psychological state which is grounded in your physiological function, in your brain, in how you feel, how you experience. It's not just a state floating, but it's related to your physiological function. It's also a motivational variable that develops. So you can have a little interest, which is much better than no interest at all, and that interest can develop. But in order to develop, a lot of things have to happen. It doesn't automatically develop. And there have been a lot of misconceptions about interest. In the vocational interest literature that was in the United States very early developed, people looked at interest as a trait. Like you were born with it or you not. You either had it or you didn't. That is totally different from our position. For us, interest is developmental. It is not a trait and it's not static. It's not that you either were interested in writing or not, and nobody can do anything about that. We think that educators, parents, friends, peers, and we wrote about this, can all help developing your interest. It's a funny story about interest is synonymous or not with enjoyment. Because there is usually, when you are interested, there is a positive feeling. But that is not necessarily so. And there is an American psychologist called Sylvia who actually went into art galleries and asked people what they find interesting and what they find enjoyable. And what he found was that the two definitions were very different for different paintings. The paintings that were calming and sort of quiet were very enjoyable and not interesting. And the paintings that were kind of weird or different or were exciting, but they weren't enjoyable. So interest and enjoyment may be related, but not necessarily so. Interest is not simply an emotion, because it has always a cognitive component. It also has an emotional component. So what I am telling you is that if you are interested, you feel different when you are engaged in something you want to do and you are interested in, and also your cognitive performance tends to be different. You remember it better, you pay more attention, etc. So originally, in my introduction, Jeannie mentioned that my work that started out with trying to figure out what children find important and interesting in text and what they remember. And the findings we had was that when we gave them interesting text segments, they remember them well. when they gave them important and interesting text segments, they remembered it the best. But when we only gave them important text segments that were not interesting, they tended not to remember. So this was very unusual because I don't know how many of you did ever take psychology courses, but in the 50s there was the behaviorism and the rats, the reinforcement, Skinner, that was followed by cognitive psychologists who believed that everything in your brain was evaluated for its importance, and that were the most likely information pieces that you remember. So when we found this out, that people tend to remember what is really interesting as well or better than something that is important, it was really a sort of a switch in where this whole area was going. And just to give you an example, one of the texts we used were about gorillas. And it was grade 6 to 8 kids, and it was about the community of gorillas, what they ate and blah, blah. So all kinds of scientific information, well-written, good piece of information. And in it was information that the gorilla, who was the leader of the pack, was called the silverback, because he had gray silver hair on the back of his back. So we had kids rate all the segments in this text. And we also collected short-term and long-term recall of the various sections of the text. And I'm sure you're guessing it, that everybody remembered the silverback way better than any of the important information in the text. So this is where we started to look at, well, maybe interest is a really important factors, and we named it situational interest. Because the people didn't have interest in the gorillas to start with. We situationally triggered and then maybe maintained that kind of interest. So that was the beginning of our work, and we coined it situational interest. In the meantime, Anne Renninger did a PhD thesis in Philadelphia, and she looked at individual interests of 3 to 5-year-old children. And what she found was amazing, because at that point, people didn't think that 3 to 5-year-olds would remember things that they were playing with better than things that they were less likely to play with. But that's exactly what she found. Kids at that age knew when they came into the room, trucks, dolls, trains, whatever, and they went for that. They gazed immediately to the object of their interest. And then when she collected gazes, she collected the frequency that they played with, she collected recognition from objects that they had to pick out something and recall related to these stories. So she established that as early as 3 to 5 years old, individual interest, because these were the children already came with that interest, it wasn't just usually triggered, they wanted to play with dinosaurs or trucks or whatever, was really important. So, Anne and I got together, and in the German literature, there were a lot of people who said that situational interest is not really interest, it's not the same thing, and individual interest is the real psychological factor that we look at. And then she and I started to work together, and we recognized that actually there is a hierarchy. There is a relation. In order to have individual interest, at one point, your situational interest had to be triggered and maintained, that then developed into individual interest. So, I want to give you a case illustration of this development that we have in details in one of the publications there. Imagine Julia, who is sitting in, let's say, a dentist office, not a doctor, dentist office. She's very nervous. She doesn't like the dentist, just like her. Okay, so she has to go in there, and she sees a magazine, and on the magazine title is something about a facilitator. A facilitator. So this is kind of a curiosity or situational interest at the very beginning, difficult to distinguish, as I later will tell you. And she says, what is a facilitator? She's a graduate student, and she's just not quite sure what she's going to do with her life. So she starts reading it. So this is kind of triggered situational interest, because she had never heard the word facilitator. It's not something she came with. So the nurse comes and calls her to go into the dentist. She goes in, an hour later, she comes out. Instead of walking out of the door, making her next appointment, she sits down and looks at the magazine that she marked in the middle of the article. So this is now what we call maintained situational interest. So she reads it, makes notes for herself, because she thinks maybe I want to know more about what the facilitator does for a living. And then she goes to the library and reads and finds out all the information. So now you have what we call the emerging state, the beginning state of individual interest, that may or may not then develop into an development. But this is the progression, and you can see this everywhere. You can see this in children and in grandchildren, that they may have just a triggered interest that if you support it somehow, adults are much better in self-supporting it. But if you have children, you might have to support that interest by raising questions, giving books, talking about it, etc. Okay. So I just go back for a minute here, because I want to tell you that in our book and in our a lot of our publications, we actually define these different 4 phases very specifically as how you can characterize the phases. Because there are differences. At the very early stages, a lot of the triggering is external. It can be rewards, it can be the environment, it can be teachers triggering, raising questions, parents giving books, etc. As you come down to the emerging individual interest, more and more becomes self-generated. People are looking for information that relates to their interests, and it is a much less likely need for external input, although support is important all of the time. Even when you have a well-developed interest and you voluntarily engagements, independent, depth, frequency are all characteristics of well-developed individual interest. You all have that. You all have, I'm sure that if you think about your lives, there are certain things that are beyond question you want to do. You want to get more information, you want to read, etc., etc. And I want to point out, this will come up later on as well, that one thing about individual interest, even if it's well developed, if it's not supported, it can basically drop, fall, disappear. And one example of this is a good one that a lot of us experience, where actually in sciences and trying to get fundings. We write a proposal, we write a research proposal. The research proposal relates to our well-developed interest because we have been working on this for a long time. We are really interested. We want to know the answer to these questions. We write the proposal, we submit the request for the money, but we don't get it. So what do? Well, we say, okay, this is a done committee, and we're going to resubmit it to another. Search the internet, search all kind of information, the best possible funding agency, we send this back. And now it comes back with another rejection. Well, we drop it. We have a well-developed interest, it wasn't supported, we drop it. So even if you are in that phase, you can be, you can have it basically denied, or you just, it falls off. One of the very most important things about interest development is that universal. Everybody can develop interest. Maybe not in the same thing. Even people who have interest in the same topic are not necessarily interested in the same ideas. So it's quite idiosyncratic what you're interested in. but every child goes into that classroom with a good teacher can develop some form of interest. Maybe not individual interest, but even if it maintains, it's better than no interest at all. And you see, about what is so important about interest is that you make connections. You're not just like in a curiosity state when you actually want to know the answer and you get the answer and you forget it, okay? So one of the examples that we use when we talk about the difference between curiosity and interest for something that you could easily relate is a mystery novel. So when you read a mystery novel, most of the time you want to know who is the killer, that's it. And once you find out who is the killer, you might not even finish the book, and it's gone. If you take somebody's work who writes an essay, such as, I don't know if you know Peterson, Canadian Peterson's work on the 12 Rules of Life, or Cartmeyer's work, or some people who've been doing really important essays. And if you get interested in that, you don't drop it. It's not like you finish after you read it. You want to know more about it. You look at what else did this person write. You make connections between what the person said and what you have in your brain and what you can tell your kids about. So it's like an expanding knowledge base. And when your interest develops, knowledge develops with it and value. I mentioned that before, at the beginning with Einstein. It's a very important aspect of interest development, that it's correlated. It's not independent of knowledge acquisition. The more interested you are, the more you engage and the more you gain knowledge. And for important endeavors in human life and in schools, this is quite critical. So, all these things have multiple scientific proofs about the positive outcomes that are related to functioning when you are interested. I'm not going to give you, I can give you 100 references for that at this point, because the fact is that it supports attention, effort, memory, motivation, levels of learning, and the likelihood of creative endeavors and achievement. And if you even want to just go on the internet and put in some of the words, you can find out how many studies have actually proved this very positive outcomes of interest-related engagements. Now, it's important to notice that it's not just interest in itself, but it's related to a lot of other psychological concepts, like goals. Okay, so if you are a golfer, your goal may be to reduce your handicap. They tell me I'm not. If you are a tennis player, you may want to have a goal. It's not easy to do it here, that you want to go from 2.5 to a 3.11. You may have real problems with that. And but your actual interests influence your goals. Your goals can also influence your interests. So, for example, you are a medical student and you are a graduate student who wants to get into medical school. And one of the requirements is that you have to take a course in chemistry that really discuss chemistry, okay? Like I do economics, but you have to do it. You have to do it. And you're lucky. You have a fabulous instructor. So what happens? You actually get interested in chemistry because this teacher somehow catches you, triggers your interest. Next thing you know, you voluntarily take another course. So the goals can influence also interest. Self-efficacy is the belief that you can perform certain activities. While there is many studies that show a really close correlation between self-efficacy and interest. If you are interested in the activity that you are engaged, you are more likely to feel that you can do it and that you are self-efficacious about it. Like you're interested in writing, you think you can write most of the time. Not always, but there is a close manifested relation. Self-regulation is an interesting one. I don't know how many of you heard of the work on grit. Anybody here knows what grit is? G-R-I-T? Yes. So that is publications on grit. Okay, so grit, according to some psychologists, really distinguishes those who do it and those who don't. Because grit is what pushes you to do the effort and be successful and so on. Well, you only need grit if you have no interest. Because if you have interest, you have self-regulation. You want to do it. You set the time for yourself. You don't need grit. Grit is a duplication of what you experience when you have interest in your activities. And another interesting piece of research by Carol Sansom in, I think, Utah, Colorado, was that she also showed that you can self-regulate when you have no interest. So she had said that you need to be, I think, a little older. She took college students and gave them some really boring tasks to perform. And these students had devised ways to make the task more interesting because they couldn't bear the boredom of it. So the self-regulation worked to make them more interesting. Now, identity is, a lot of things you can say about identity, but certainly when you say I'm a golfer, I'm a pitch player, in a way you take your interest and you attach it to your identity. There are other things that, of course, influence identity, but interest is one of them. Measure. How do you measure who is interested? Most of the time, in early days, people who did research said, you like this? And then they assumed you're interested. Now the problem with this is huge. Whether you like something, you can have a triggered situational interest, and you can like it if you have a well-developed individual interest. Asking this one question does not give you the answer of who is really interested in something. So Anne and I have argued that the best way to figure out who is interested in schools is to give them a behavioral task, or through behavioral activities figure it out. Because once you have depth and frequency in the engagement, you do it often and you do it in detail and you do it voluntarily, not because your mom pushes you or your teacher, and you do it independently. You go into this computer class not because your friend is going, but because you want to go. So these are the behavioral measures that can actually identify the level of interest that people have. Now, recently, Anne and I have helped 2 graduate students, PhD students at Claremont University, to devise a questionnaire for adult, non-specific interests that could measure how interested a person is in a certain activity. So you might ask, why would that be important? All of you may want to know that, and it's relevant to probably all of you. So for example, you go to a doctor, and the doctor knows that you have a physical problem, and that exercise, a certain type of exercise, is critical for your health. So the doctor does not know how reliable you would be, how interested you would be, how committed would you be to do these exercises that are really important for your health. So if we have a questionnaire that can identify the level of interest for such activities, then the doctor or the practitioner who's dealing with you would know, do I have to see you every 3 days? Do I have to call you? Do you have to have a diary? What interventions would work best for me to give you the maximum help that you need? So this is just one of the many examples why you might want to be able to measure adults' individual interest, and this paper is now under revision, and by February 5th it might be pressed. But it's kind of cute because no measurement exists of adult interest that I know of. None. Mm. Okay, so shared characteristics of curiosity and interest. Why? This is the explanation why so many people have mixed them up or think they're the same, because they have characteristics that are identical. They are motivating, they are energizing, they are facilitating, helping you. And now comes the most important part that you might have never heard of. They are both rewarding. So neuroscientific research starting in 2009 up to this day have proven that when you search in your brain for information, you are curious or you are interested, they're both searching for information, is a rewarding activity. What it means rewarding activity is that it activates the reward circuit. Through functional MRI using blood oxygenations, they have found that the reward circuitry that is around the stratum and the midbrain is actually activated the same way when you search for information, when you are curious or interested, as when you are given an external reward. Okay, so a lot of people do not know this because it's quite new. It's in the last decade that this research came. But we have, when I say we, Anne and I, have talked about physiological explanations of why interest is so powerful. And this is the explanation of why is it that you remember better, because all the characteristics of the activation of the reward circuitry that are positive can be found in when you are engaged in an interesting situation. Of course, I want to mention this for some of you that the reward circuitry activation can also be negative when it comes to addiction and misuse of this activation. But this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about normal performance, not abuse in materials that can also be related to overactivating the rewards. So thus, no extrinsic rewards are required when you are curious or when you are interested. Given that these three characteristics are similar, I now want to talk to you about what distinguishes curiosity and interest. And I have mentioned some of this before. Triggers of curiosity are most commonly uncertain. So I wrote here, actually, for those of you who might be interested in this later on, 303 trivia questions that a colleague of ours had actually just did a study on it. And the trivia questions have like this. What is the fastest healing body part of humans? The thumb. That's a trivia question. Okay, so that's a curiosity question. This is a question that people want to know the answer, but then they're dumb. Okay, so that is it. So this is a trigger for curiosity. Another one, which planet in the solar system is the only one that rotates clockwise? Venus. So there are 303 of them. As you can copy them and take them home for your grandchildren if they're really bored. But this is not going to make them into scientists. Okay, this is just going to keep them occupied for a little while. Triggers for interest are much more wider than just uncertainty. You can trigger them in many ways, and in our book we describe them in details how teachers, parents, educators can trigger interest. The role of knowledge is very different because in curiosity, going back to early work, people always argue that if you know too much about something or you know too little, you are not curious about it. The knowledge has to be needed. Interest, there is no limit to your knowledge. The more interested you are, the more knowledge you can have. And the more knowledge you have, the more interest you can experience. So that's a big difference. Also the duration. Usually curiosity is like the mystery novel I mentioned, okay, and it's short. Interest has no short duration. There is no limit to you can experience it and how long it can take. Another one that I haven't talked yet at all is the feelings. Now, Bernheim was the first person in the 40s who talked about this. But when you are curious, you often have a negative emotion, like it's not comfortable if your curiosity is at a high level. And when the curiosity is resolved, then you have a positive affective reaction. So there has been studies that have actually supported this kind of change in affect in neuroscience. Not everybody believes this because there is a recent paper that doubts this, but I personally think it's true because I know that there are sometimes films that my husband watches and it's just too curious for me, not like I just don't feel comfortable when I leave the room because I have negative feelings about it. So, you know, I don't know, you can think about it, but generally speaking, interest in the developing stages is often related to positive feelings. Curiosity first might be negative and then change. One other thing I wanted to tell you that curiosity, emotions are one thing, but in interest, you can have interest at the triggered stage that has a negative connotation. Like in one of the papers we were talking about somebody who does an anatomical work on dead bodies and stuff like that, and it's kind of interesting but horrible. But once you develop an interest, then your activities are likely to be positive emotional experiences. Just think about it. Even when you are golfing, if you're a golfer, and you just have a really horrible shot, you might be negative and you might be angry, but you're going back again because somehow it does give you a positive sense for the event, or else you wouldn't go back, right? So there is a difference between these two experiences. Okay, so now this has been an interesting question. How are they related? Curiosity can help trigger situational interest and then developing interest. No question about this. There is a question whether you can actually distinguish between the early stages of interest development and curiosity. And without neuroscientific help, we do not know the answer, but I suggest that they could help us figure this out later. When you have interest, you can generate your own knowledge gaps. Okay, so that's important. You can generate curiosity questions. You know about this so much, let's say you are an experienced mathematician, and you can generate your own puzzles. Or you can generate a question that I don't know the answer, I now have to go and look it up in a library, or I have to find out the answer, but you are in a position to generate your own curiosity questions. Okay, I don't know about this. Okay, so educational implications. So why does it matter? It does matter because of what happens in the classroom. People who want to encourage curiosity usually increase uncertainty, as I mentioned this to you before. But there is something else if you want to encourage interest. So I want to give you two examples. There is a rocket, so-called bottle rocket, that you can do in kids' science classes early on, that has something to do with the ratio between baking soda and vinegar. And I think 12:1, I'm not one of these scientists, but I think 12:1 is the ratio, at which point there's a big hot and a rocket. So in one of the experiments, they have given these things in the science class to the children who were very curious about the question, what is the right ratio? And once they did this, in the dump. But when the teacher recognized that this is just curiosity and wants to support interest, the teacher started to ask questions and give them different kind of input of what the kids can do to further deal with this kind of ratio and different chemicals, different bottles, and the kids suddenly became interested. So you do something else in the classroom if you recognize that there is interest that has to be supported. The other one related, I don't think I mentioned you in Norway today, did I? No. 400 tourists and the Northern Light. They were all from Britain, and they were all wanted to see the Northern Light. And for 3 days, this is a fact, this is a true story because Anne and I were in Ramsel when this was done, in northern Norway. There was a cloud cover. Most disappointed 400 English tourists you have ever seen. Invested money, invested time, no Northern Light. The last day, they were told that this is their last chance and there is something happening with the cover, the cloud cover, and there's a chance they will see the Northern Light. So they actually saw the Northern Light. After this experience, they were elated, and there was a questionnaire, and they all said they loved it and so on, right after they experienced it. Next day, before they left, each of them were interviewed about their experience, and you're not going to believe this, but I can tell you that this is a true story because I was there and saw the data. Out of the 400 people, there wasn't one person who mentioned the Northern Light. They were curious, it was done, they were happy it was done, it was done. Now, if some of these people would have been related to physics or some kind of science courses, to the whole idea of Northern Light more than just the fact that they wanted to see it, the results would have been very different. And this is why I'm saying to you that the educational implications of this is that in the classroom, in your house, in your grandchildren's presence, you have to be able to distinguish between curiosity and interest if you want to support. An example of this is the stepfather, who is interested in fishing, and he has a new stepson. And the stepson, wanting to be polite, asks him something about which of these is the better way to fish. So the stepfather takes these curiosity questions as a demonstration of the child's interest and buys him some fishing equipment for Christmas. But the kid is interested in baseball. He couldn't care less really about the fishing rods. The father is devastated that the fishing stuff stays in the cupboard and the kid goes on the internet and looks up all the things that he wants to know about heroes in baseball, etc., etc. He could have bought a book if he'd taken care of to find out what he actually was not simply curious about, but what he was interested in. So there is something about this for everybody. I think when you want to, okay, so I have been very definite about the fact that it is very critical that we know about this distinction for education, for families and everything about curiosity and interest, and that we deal with interest, not with curiosity. And I was given the opportunity last December, not this, like in 18, at the University of Pennsylvania, to give a talk about similar talk, but a little different than what I'm doing here about curiosity and interest. And it was basically heavily neuroscientists who were there. And you know that neuroscientists generally, I don't know how much you know about neuroscientists, but I can tell you this, they do not laugh to hear that psychologists talking about. So I have studied talked my neck out and gave them a speech about the fact that they should help us. They should actually look at motivation, they should look at education, and they should start to sort out the distinction between curiosity and interest. They could if they wanted. But most of them just talk about curiosity. They don't even know that it's different. They told me that they never heard the difference until they heard my talk, and some of them were quite complimentary, but I have yet to see research that actually takes into consideration what I was suggesting. So just to quickly tell you that I suggest that 3 ways that they could do this. And one is eye movement. I don't know if how much you know about eye movements, but eye movements used to be very popular in psychological research in the 70s and 80s, because the way that you move your eyes tells you a lot about what is going on in the brain. And one of the famous studies was that children were given pictures in which they, let's say, had a farmhouse and a tractor, and a farmhouse and an octopus. Okay, so there's a big difference here. So one is curious, the other is just a normal thing. And then they looked at the eye movements, and it was very different, the time it took, how frequent they looked at the objects, how they remembered there was all these big differences. Then this became not fashionable, you know, it's like what you wear, it comes and goes. Nobody did eye movements. Recently in America, a person called Patrick in New York and a number of others, people have started to look again, what do we know about how the eye moves? And I just suggested that one of the things you could do is to see if the eye movements are different, if they're just curious versus if you are interested. So that was one of the things. And the other thing was that affective markers, I mentioned to you before that is there a negative aspect of curiosity that doesn't exist when you are interested. And there is ways that now neuroscientists know how to look at affective reactions in the brain, and if they wanted to, they could see that, is that a difference? That's just what I told you about, okay? I want to go back for a minute. How many of you heard of transdermal video imaging? Okay, so it's the kind of stuff that is very new, and actually a person at the University of Toronto, where I'm affiliated with, has done a lot of work, and there is a TED Talk, and if you want to entertain yourself, you should go and listen. Kang had, the name is Kang, and he gave a talk about children's lying, not related to anything I'm talking about today, but about how you can tell when a child is lying through a video imaging that looks at the skin and the blood flow in your skin. And it's a very fabulous TED Talk because you never know which kid is lying and isn't until he does this. The kid you think is not lying is the liar, and vice versa. And so I talked to him and I said, well, could you actually distinguish curiosity from interest to do this? And he said, absolutely. But he hasn't done it yet. So, okay, so I am just wanting to close this on the note that you can support your grandchildren, you can support your own, you can support other people's interests, and without such support, you might not really do the best you can. And in my last sentence, I want to acknowledge that I have actually got such support from my husband, without whom. Thank you.
Suzanne, and we'll have a question and answer session now, so if anybody has any questions for Suzanne, please don't hesitate to ask.
Yes.
It seems like curiosity can be unlimited, or you can be curious about almost anything, so if that's not limited. But is interest limited, and does that change with age?
Okay. So first of all, I did not, you know how you always say it's a great question and you don't know the answer. I do know the answer, but this is a great question. I did not talk about one thing, that has been a lot of research about curiosity as a trait. Some people, and this is verified research, you can look it up. Lippmann was one of the people who did this research, lots of studies. There is a clear-cut difference in people of how curious they are and how many various areas they are curious about. That it is, curiosity can be looked at as a trait. Other words, it's not limited. Some people are much more curious than others. And some people can just not leave it alone until they know the answer. So there is a trait element of curiosity. I didn't bring it in because it has 50 studies. But I have never heard of anybody talking about interest as a trait. Simply because the emphasis is on that it develops. And therefore, it's not limited because it is very idiosyncratic. Depending on your experience, depending on your exposure, you can have a lot of interest, you can have few interests, you can have the same topic that you're interested in, but very different ways to relate. So I don't think that I have ever heard the idea that how limited or how large it can be. But I do know that you can argue that anybody could have support in anything if it's appropriate to at least trigger some interest. Not necessarily that it will become an interest, but you can support it. But in curiosity, there are big differences in people, how deep, how often, and how it's a trait. Yes?
So you can have,
Just a minute. The lady in the back and then you. Yes.
thank you. So you can have curiosity without ever having interest. But from what I have heard, you can't have interest without being curious first.
Okay, so if you take the idea that the very beginning of situational interest, when it's triggered, cannot be distinguished from curiosity, you could say that. What we would say is that you can trigger situational interest with items that are not usually related to triggering curiosity. So for example, intensity is one of them. We know that if I tell you that he is the greatest runner in the world versus he won the college tryouts as a runner, interest is very different. You are much more interested in the best runner. So intensity. Nobody related this to curiosity. So you can trigger interest with other elements that are not usually related to curiosity. On the other hand, some other qualities like novelty and surprise, you can trigger either curiosity or interest. But they're not the same necessarily because there are other qualities set out in the book that will trigger interest but not curiosity. Okay?
The two first two, curiosity can involve some negative feelings.
Yes.
And then feelings for interest tend to be positive. So the MRI pointed out the affect of that, those two states. Curiosity, do you have any examples of the negative or curiosity?
Well, what you feel. Have you ever felt that you're curious and you're not comfortable, that you just don't want to? I have this feeling, and I don't know, most people do agree that actually has been a scientist called Jackman and colleagues, Jackman 2012, who actually did a neuroscientific study and did show that that part of the brain was activated that is normally affiliated with negative reactions. But this is one of the few studies. Mostly hasn't been done, but I kind of know that I am one of those people who don't like to be too curious. But I don't mind being interested. Yes. course.
Can you repeat the question?
She wondered if who is more successful. I just talked an hour for that, pushing you that you have to be interested. This is Charlotte, my friend.
Suzanne,
Yes.
what is your what is your
What is better, being curious or interested? Yes.
How do you see using this information that you have to train our teachers in the colleges when they're learning how to go into the classroom? What implications for those teachers?
Well, we have a whole section. Okay, so those of you who want to, I'm not pushing you to buy any books, but I will show you. I am being wired here. This is a book that we wrote about the power of interest, and this is a section on teachers. So I can't really easily tell you about the teachers who recognize what. Let me take this.
Should be a switch on the front, gray switch.
So the teachers have to actually recognize that it's not enough that they create uncertainty in their classroom and give them repeated curiosity questions. They have to bring in content. The big difference is content, the connections to content that the teachers have to bring in to the classroom, and they want to have a subject matter that actually results in developing interest. Because if you just keep on bringing up questions and give the answers or provide them a way to find the answers, and there is no connection in those pieces, that is not building up the knowledge base that you need for creative endeavors and real achievements. So the critical aspect of the whole thing is that you have to acknowledge that as soon as you are using strategies to increase interest, you have to make a connection to content that is related to that very idea or whatever you are trying to promote. And the more content, various places and various forms of content that you bring in, the more likely it is that you will be successful.
if you were in a classroom situation and you are with small children,
You want to say it here? Just say it out of the
like you're in the educational system or situation, and there's small children, and you watch children who are educated more in a Montessori way of thinking, you know, with the hands-on, big concept of math, whatever. And then you look at a traditional school situation where you're learning ABCs, there's a lot of rote memory. Do you think there's any correlation between
hands-on activities. Hands-on activities have been one of the things that people have repeatedly found as contributing to positive outcomes, interest development, etc. Even when you talk about rewards, when you actively get a reward, this is part of my other world that I didn't talk about today, but it is a very interesting finding that when you get a reward that is given to you, it doesn't have the same beneficial effect than if you actively earn that reward. And the person, if you ever want to check it, the name is Singh, who did a fabulous study on this, and this relates to the idea that when you're actively involved in any kind of endeavor, it becomes yours. Another thing that I did not mention to you is what is called self-related processing. So anything that is personally relevant to you, and that is 100 years of research on personal factors affect our memory. And now it's also related to the reward circle. That is good. But anything that is personally relevant to you, you remember much better than the same story if it relates to your mother or to a stranger. So this personal relevance is also part of this whole active engagement. And there is a relationship.
I got one more observation. As we get older, some of these same principles that we use with children, people going to wherever they are going to go to are going to be a lot happier if they have some sort of personal involvement in their environment, would you say?
So, Jenny Joseph is not here today, but she gave me an article that appeared in the Atlantic that had actually talked about crystallized and fluid intelligence, which dates back to Cacal's work in the 40s or whatever. And the difference is such that fluid intelligence is what you need for creating new inventions, etc., and that tends to peak between 40 and 50. Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, is the kind that is based on experience, and what I am arguing, interest-related activities contribute to, which don't have the same short-lived trajectory, okay? So your crystallized intelligence does not necessarily have to decrease when you are 50. So when you're asking what are the age-related implications, it's complicated. Because depending on the activity and what it involves, in different age groups may, react differently. Yes.
Yeah, so here we are, 2020. And for me personally, I want to know from you, this new generation coming out, the effect of screen time. The fact that many children grow up in isolation. What is your response to how will it affect their curiosity? By not having, for many of them, the interaction with each other anymore, if they're glued to a screen instead of. So I would like to.
Okay, so in terms of curiosity, the kids have to do much less work in the library. They have to do much less active investigations. They go on the internet, put in the question, and that was the answer. So for sure, it's going to affect their, just affect them. Whether they have to go to the library and read 4 books before they know the answer to something they want to know. People who are interested, even though they have the computer, they might have more extensive search for content than just putting in, like when I do work, I sometimes put in something to the computer, but if it relates to what I'm talking today, I do much more than just get an answer. So again, I think, yes, if you're curious and you have an internet, it's a very different story. You put in the question and pops out your answer. You don't have to do anything. It's a minimal effort for you. So, it doesn't teach you how to put up, how to persevere. And it will definitely have an outcome. Not in the, there are people who do this research. I'm not one of them. But I know that, for example, there's very interesting research on the effect of the internet on various academic performance. But it's not my research, so I'm not that research. But it's out there. And even you will need it. Yes.
I want to ask one other question. Why was Einstein wrong?
All you have to do is be your high school teachers to everyone class. You figure all this out, people different triggers to learn. You just have to figure out how to trigger that kid.
He had knowledge. He had
Ask about this. This is way,
all the things that you don't just
to me, it's stuff that I knew 50 years ago I was teaching.
Yeah.
How many of you understand why he was wrong, please?
Well, my first teacher
Thank you.